basically where Muslim League wanted to create a better relationship with the British government and thereby bring more facilities and benefits for the Muslim population. Um, Chowdhury Moezuddin Bishwash didn't really want to be in a position where he would have to make too much of compromises with the British government. He preferred to maintain a certain diplomatic distance with them and from them, and therefore he couldn't get himself to actually become a part of this new initiative. This unfortunately did get him into the negative books of a lot of the Muslim elite of the time, but he did not care. He was very much a person who believed in his principles, and when he believed in certain principles, he just went ahead in implementing that, and he never looked back. So you can clearly see that he was someone who played a very pivotal role in the formation of politics in the whole of Bengal, in the whole of India, and also in Faridpur. And definitely he passed those values on to his children as well, and it is being carried on generation to generation. So these were some of his contributions and achievements in the sector of politics. I've talked about a little bit about his achievements and contributions in the field of business and estate management and governorship of a large part of the population of Bengal. And now I would actually like to talk a little bit about his contributions in a few other sectors as well. He had enormous contribution in the sector of education. He made more than 27 schools across his estate. And not only did he make all these schools, along with the schools, he also made mosques, madrasas, orphanages, and also dormitories where students could come and stay and receive a higher education in the more prestigious institutions in those places. So in the colleges and in universities, not only did he do that, he also gave scholarships to people, so that to meritorious students, so that they could pursue higher education in Calcutta, in Delhi, and in other places as well. So basically, Chowdhury Moezuddin Bishwash, and he gave these scholarships also to not just to Muslims. To a great extent, he gave these scholarships to whoever would be deserving. The majority of the people who received these scholarships were actually non-Muslim. I would like to share some more information with you about the social contributions that he made. He was a very secular person. In his entire estate management, he had the majority of his estate managers were actually non-Muslim. They were Hindus. But it didn't make a difference to him, in spite of the fact that he was personally a very religious and devout Muslim. And when he came into Faridpur in the early 1880s, he actually played the role that Hazrat Shah Jalal played in Sylhet. That's the role that he played in Faridpur, actually. Because he also came into Faridpur after defeating a coalition of more than 14 zamindars in a very intense battle that lasted for about 2 days. And after defeating them, he came into Faridpur and he abolished many of the near apartheid type practices which were prevailing in Faridpur at the time. Like, for example, Muslims were not allowed to make houses within Faridpur. They were not allowed to receive education in any of the schools that were prevailing within Faridpur at that time. Muslims were not allowed to wear sandals or shoes within the territory, and they were not allowed to own businesses or any property. They were only permitted to do menial work and then leave the town premises and stay outside the town in squatter settlements. So all of that was completely abolished by Chowdhury Moezuddin Bishwash when he entered Faridpur. And not only did he contribute to the emancipation of Muslims, but he also did a lot to raise the living standard of the lower caste Hindu population as well. He gave away more than 20,000 handlooms to people who he felt had the skill and wanted to become an entrepreneur irrespective of religion. He gave pottery machines out to thousands of people as well across his estates. So these are some of the ways in which he bolstered up the economy, bolstered up the society. He broke the stratification in the society, and he sparked up and catalyzed a whole an awakening, like a renaissance in Faridpur and across his estates. So these are some really fascinating things. Oh, I also need to mention in the realm of education, in Faridpur town, he established the Chowdhury Moezuddin High School, and that was actually later expanded and given the government accreditation by his sons in the 1920s, late 1920s. And he was also the one to establish the first female school in Faridpur. In fact, it could be one of the oldest females schools for females in Bengal. He established it in the early 1900s, but then in the 1930s, his sons got government accreditation for it, and also expanded it and relaunched it. The name of that school is Halima Girls High School. So basically, he was so far-sighted. I mean, he saw the value of education, and he saw the value of educating females as well. So he was an amazing personality, far ahead of his time, and even the businesses that he was doing was far ahead of his time. I'll talk about that in just a bit. Let me talk a little bit about the infrastructural developments that he made. Across his estates for better communication, he practically constructed hundreds of kilometers of road network, and many of these roads are the roads which are still in use today. He also constructed miles upon miles, kilometers and kilometers of embankments, with the help of which he prevented erosion, and he literally changed the course of the river in certain places. He dug irrigation canals from the rivers and from the tributaries and distributaries of those rivers far into the interior. Miles of irrigation canals were created by him. He also constructed a lot of culverts and bridges as well in order to help people cross from different parts of his estate to one another. And in order to improve communication from Faridpur to Dhaka and to Calcutta, he actually launched a lot of launches and boats and steamer services, and he even took a lease for more than 100 kilometers of the river Podda, and he started these kinds of businesses of ferrying people across from Dhaka to Faridpur and back and forth. So you almost name any side, and Chowdhury Moezuddin Bishwash was there, and he was making a difference and making a massive contribution. So when you think about it, that, I mean, this is a person who did all of these things by his own self-initiative in such a stratified society, where there were many people who were envious of him and who were always trying to obstruct his growth, and where the government was against him and always finding loopholes to try and restrict his growth. It is phenomenal. And it was not just that the people were envious of him and trying to restrict his growth through through litigations or through legal means. They also tried to kill him. I mean, through his life, there were almost 6 assassination attempts that were made upon his life, and he survived through all of those. He also actually not only survived the assassination attempts, but he also emerged victorious and a survivor in more than 50 battles, including the one that helped him to establish himself in Faridpur town. So he actually fought personally in more than 50 battles, which also included the Sepoy Revolution of 1857 and the anti-Indigo movement of 1859. He had trained up an army himself because he was a great fighter. So he trained up an army himself, and with that army he had participated in the 1857 Sepoy Revolution and in the anti-Indigo movement of 1859-1860. And later on, in the 1870s, he created an army of almost 20,000 armed forces. And he created it like a police force, and he deployed it all across his estates, because back in the 1870s, there wasn't really a structured police force in place. So he deployed this army all over his estates so that the estate could be managed peacefully and discipline could be maintained, and so that attacks from other rival lords and other dacoits and pillagers and looters from other places could be prevented. And it's basically in those kinds of encounters with other rival lords and with dacoits and pillagers that sometimes he himself went into those skirmishes and conflicts as well. And he always performed brilliantly as a leader at the very forefront. I just want to show you his picture. Here's a picture of Chowdhury Moezuddin Bishwash taken in 1902 when he was 62 years old. He was a very handsome gentleman with a face that resembled that of a Royal Bengal tiger. Everyone said that he had tremendous amount of charisma, light eyes, heavy set. I think he actually looks a lot like some really very powerful and prominent film stars of India as well. So basically, Chowdhury Moezuddin Bishwash was not just only someone who people looked up to because of his awesome activities and achievements, but they actually looked up to him as well because he was a giant, he was a tower. He was a few inches taller than me. He was about 6'6" or 6'7", because I've worn his clothes and they hang loosely all over me, and I happen to be reasonably tall, alhamdulillah. So basically, he was a giant, and there are photographs of him with his brothers, and there are two of his brothers who were a little bit taller than him, so they were like a family of giants. So Chowdhury Moezuddin Bishwash was this enormous person with enormous physical strength as well, and a booming voice, and someone with a tremendous commanding personality, which I'm sure you can understand from the different things that I've already talked about him. I want to, when I'm talking about infrastructure, I also want to definitely throw in another piece of information. He invested his own money in making the train line. I mean, naturally, the government was funding it, but he also put in a lot of his own funds and contributed land for the making the train connection in between Calcutta to Faridpur. And he also made the second station in Faridpur, which was called the Amir Ali station, which is just a couple of kilometers away from his ancestral home in Chandpur. And Amir Ali was actually one of his nephews who helped him a lot in many of these battles. So in honor of him and in recognition of him, Chowdhury Moezuddin Bishwash made this station and named it after him. So Chowdhury Moezuddin Bishwash was actually a larger than life personality. Definitely there were people who were wealthier than him, or maybe who were more powerful than him, who had more achievements than him, perhaps in various fields, in constitutional politics or in other fields. But for somebody to be able to do all of these things and in one lifetime, and also to be able to create an estate, an empire like this, which other people often would other families often took 200 years to create something like what he was able to do in his own lifetime. At a time when there was no communication devices, when there was no internet, it is actually fascinating. It is absolutely amazing the way that he was able to maintain communication between the different wings of his entire estate. That's also something to be inspired about, because the way that he managed and administered everything, he set up offices in each zone. There were about 12 offices that he had, and each was manned by very, very highly educated estate managers with a team of professionals. And it's amazing. The way that he administered the estate was very similar to the way that maybe a multinational organization or like a very top leading corporate body would be managing their business today. So it is simply phenomenal what this person was able to do more than 100 years ago. So all of these achievements, when you think about, and when you understand that all of this was done by a person facing so much of persecution, so much of opposition, people trying to kill him, it's phenomenal. So that's the reason why I find Chowdhury Moezuddin Bishwash to be a person that I'm so fascinated about. And I hope that by now you are also beginning to have an appreciation about him and having an understanding about why he is someone that deserves to be discussed about and talked about at length. There are so many other things that probably I should have mentioned, but I've probably forgotten to mention in this video, and I'll definitely talk about it later. But I think I was able to give you a basic overview of the kind of person that he was. I can also mention just another thing at this point in time, that he was the first to make a mosque in Faridpur town. He was the first to start prayers in Faridpur town, the first to lead the Eid Jamaat and the Jummah prayers in Faridpur town, the first to give an azan in Faridpur town. He also re-established the whole practice of praying in Faridpur town, because a lot of that had gotten completely extinct because not only of the non-Muslim rulers, but also because certain school of thought that was being promulgated by another sect of Muslims who said that a country being managed by Christians or non-Muslims becomes Darul Harb, and you cannot pray or do congregational prayers over there until and unless you can get rid of those rulers. And until the time that you're being able to do that, the cumulative sin of that falls upon you. But Chowdhury Moezuddin Bishwash came in and revoked those kinds of thoughts and that school of thought, and re-established the practice of prayers. So he was a secular person, but at the same time he was a devout Muslim. He had enormous contribution to the establishment of Islam in Faridpur, almost like similar to what Hazrat Shah Jalal did, but he never promoted himself as a saint or as a religious preacher. That's why perhaps, and because it's much more recent, that's why perhaps his activities was not taken to a legendary level like that of Hazrat Shah Jalal was. I'm not trying to say that he was at the same level as Hazrat Shah Jalal, but I'm just saying that some of his contributions for Islam and religion in Faridpur was similar to what Hazrat Shah Jalal did in Sylhet, or Hazrat Balkiya did in Bogura. So basically, he was a leader, a true people's leader. He was known to grant donations to thousands of people for marriages, and there were hundreds of homes that he built in Faridpur for people to live in, which he didn't even take any rent from. I mean, the stories about him are just absolutely innumerable. And he was known for exempting taxes as well in different zones in different years, because of the fact that there was always so much surplus that he was being able to generate from his business and from the very efficient way in which he managed his estate. So basically, I would like to invite you to watch the other videos in which I'm going to talk about his life in a more chronological fashion, where it may not seem so haphazard. But I hope you enjoyed listening to this video. I hope you enjoyed the content of this video. And if you have, please subscribe to the channel, please share the video, and please definitely watch the other videos that are coming up. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for your encouragement and your appreciation, because of which I'm making this video. Please pray for Chowdhury Moezuddin Bishwash so that definitely Allah grants him Jannat, and let us all try and derive some inspiration from a person like that, and let us also try and carry some of the values that he did, and let us try and make our lives better in the process, and the lives of all the people that we work with and the greater community. Thank you so much for being with me. I would now like to take leave. Thank you.